All right, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We are lucky to have the wonderful Allison Smith here, who's going to talk to us about human trafficking. So let's go in and do a little bit of housekeeping. So the first thing, of course, I want to thank the Office of Violence Against Women for supporting the work that we do through the grants that we get. And hey, we get to put on these super cool webinars for you with free bonus content in the beginning there. So here is your panel. And so your panel your Zoom screen should look like this. And so let's go over some of the features that we will use today. The first one is the Q&A button. So you can press this button at any time and ask Allison or I a question. And I will be monitoring those. So as soon as they come in, I will, let Allison know. If it's a question that I know Allison is going to cover, then I won't answer the question or won't ask the question to her because I know it's coming up. The next thing is going to be the raise hand button. So if we ask a question like, hey, how many of you saw Sasquatch this morning? And everyone's like, heck, I def saw Sassy, right? Then you would raise your hand so we can kind of get a consensus of who saw Sasquatch this morning. And then we have the chat feature, which is great. Some of you have already utilized it. So this is a way for y'all to talk to each other if you have any questions, comments, and also I will be monitoring this. So if you have a question, I can see it in the chat as well. How about we all click that chat button and then go ahead and on your drop-down menu, click all panelists and all attendees. And why don't you tell us who you are, where you're from, maybe what you're expecting to learn, what you would like to learn. Yeah, so just type right in that chat box and tell us a little bit about you. Someone already said that they enjoy the laughter. Just click that chat button and type in a little bit about you. All right, so we have some case managers. Nice, from our local domestic violence service providers. Excellent. I know we have a couple system advocates. I'm like, oh, why can't I think of that? We have a couple system advocates on there. We have other advocates at universities, right? All right, and then they talk about wanting to learn a little bit more about how to work with law enforcement on human trafficking cases. Oh, heck, that is a great, great question. So we have some LCSWs, and we generally do have a bunch of LCSWs on these trainings. So yeah, thank you everyone for typing in. And then the last thing I want to cover is, yes, there is an hour of CEUs available. After this webinar, you will get an email with the link to that quiz. So just take it and get at least 70%, and then I will send you your CEU certificate. All right, so I'm going to turn the time over to Allison.
Okay, I'm trying to decide on lighting. I'm in a different spot in my house today, so anyway, just trying to decide on that. All right, share screen. We are getting after it. I want to optimize our video, and I'm gonna, okay, let's get this ready. Thought that was ready. All right, here we are. And I need to move that so I can, there we go. Okay. Let me move that back. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you all. And it is always my pleasure to be anywhere that Andy is. So anyway, just a delight. And today we're gonna, I'd like this to be as interactive as possible. I want to share a little bit about Our agency, when you see Refuge Immigrant Center Asian Association of Utah, it can give you kind of a misimpression. First of all, on behalf of Department of Justice and Bureau of Justice Assistance, I'm able to be here today, and I'm grateful for that. I want to tell you a little bit about our program. So specifically housed within the Asian Association is the Trafficking in Persons program. We call it the TIP program. We provide direct service provision for individuals who've been trafficked. And we have holistic wraparound services we provide. We have case management, case managers assigned one-on-one to those that we serve that are our clients. We also provide education and outreach. That is my stewardship, and love what I do. I get out there into the state and cover the whole state and train law enforcement, judges, LCSWs, all you guys, just anybody who will really listen. I'm willing to talk about human trafficking, and I love it. And then outreach, we do a lot of partnering with other agencies so that those agencies can fulfill the needs that our survivors have. And as well, you know, we can help them in many ways too, mostly with training and education, but also other dynamics as well. We provide some prevention and support groups, mostly for youth. And then we are a joint holder of the grant with the Attorney General's office that forms the Utah Trafficking in Persons Task Force. And so that we are grateful for. We also have a survivor leadership program, and we have a drop-in center where we provide a variety of things for individuals who are being exploited. Okay, today we're going to get right into it. We're going to get into the definition of trafficking. What is it? What are some potential indicators or red flags? Then we're going to be looking at risk factors or vulnerabilities that basically would kind of allow a good segue, I guess we could say, into the life of trafficking. There are individuals that have many risk factors that make them more vulnerable, although I'm here to tell you that literally anyone could become a victim of trafficking, and you'll see how that kind of plays out as we go through today. Then we're going to look at the dynamics between the trafficker and I'm going to use the word victim, survivor, and client probably at different times in different situations today. So you're gonna hear that from me. So between the trafficker and the victim, the dynamics of control that are at play and power that are at play in the dynamic between the two of them. And then we're going to be looking kind of that trauma-informed, victim-centered lens, right? Understanding trauma, and we all have an understanding of trauma. I'm going to quickly review that in the context of trafficking, and then we're going to be looking at kind of best practices. Okay, so clearly trafficking is when someone is treated as another person's possession, and that is really in a nutshell what human trafficking is, and that can be related to sex trafficking or labor trafficking. We're going to get into that. I'm going to show you quickly. Andy, how long do I have? Do I have 90 or 60 minutes?
You have 90.
Sweet.
So you're good until 11:30.
11:30. Awesome. Okay, perfect. So anyway, you can see here from the slide that this is, and so what I'm showing you at the top here is really what Utah law is, so that you're really clear on what trafficking is, right? We have kind of the quick summary. It's when someone's treated as another person's possession, but what we really want to see here is, and I'm hoping you'll really take away, among other things, is what trafficking is. There are three basic components of trafficking. Of course, for trafficking to be a crime, what we're talking about is the dynamics that are committed by the trafficker, right? For it to be a crime. And so we break it down with three, we call this the AMP model, AMP, and we break it down in these three categories: the action, potential actions that a trafficker would commit or do, and then the means whereby those happen, and then for what purpose, right? And in this case, it's for the purpose of either commercial, sex, or labor or service. And we're going to get into not just, I mean, most people think, or many people think, that when we talk about trafficking, we're just talking about sex trafficking. That is a thing. We are definitely talking about that. But we are also talking about labor trafficking, and there's a lot of it happening in Utah. So we'll talk about that. So in terms of actions, you might have a trafficker that attempts to recruit someone or recruit someone into the life. And by the life, I mean the life of trafficking. That's kind of the language that those that are in the life use about what they're doing. So I tend to use that because I'm around people a lot that say that. And so someone might attempt to recruit someone into the life. And in the process of doing that, they would become, a really good friend, a trusted person, someone that the individual they're trying to recruit thinks that they can trust and that they can confide in. And they might, once they're in the life, right, once they've recruited that person into the life, and typically it's through the force, fraud, or coercion we're going to get into, they might then take a photo of them and advertise them on the internet. And so you can see that covers two of the actions listed there, right? Recruiting and advertising. And then the means whereby that occurs, we're talking about force, fraud, or coercion. And again, that's any one of those things. And in terms of force, we're talking about, things you might have seen or heard of a lot in terms of maybe someone's kidnapped or someone's beaten repeatedly until they finally, say, I will do what you're asking me to do. So force, I want to tell you, some new data came out, and only in about 5% of cases is the recruitment or is that process of trafficking involving elements of force in terms of that initial recruitment. So I want to kind of clarify that, because a lot of folks think that that's pretty much exclusively what's involved, and it isn't. And we're going to talk about, the other aspects. Now let's cover fraud. Fraud is basically probably thinking it's a lie, right? It's someone telling an untruth. Fraud is where someone misrepresents reality and they know they're doing it. Okay. So they might tell someone, I need you, and they're talking on the internet. I hope that you'll come from Peru and work for me as a sheep herder, and you can make all this money for your family, send it back home, maybe bring your family here to the US, right? A variety of different things. Or you're the most amazing girlfriend I've ever had, and if you'll just do this favor for me, then it will help us make more money, and we can, buy a beautiful home and have a family, and, all of those things. So kind of telling this beautiful story that someone who's in a rough situation wants to believe. And so that individual is committing fraud. Then the other option, or the other aspect of the law as it's outlined, is coercion. Coercion is a dynamic where the trafficker, right, the trafficker is typically going to be establishing and looking to establish this relationship of trust with the person that they're attempting to recruit. And they are going to sit and talk, become a good friend, become a confidant. Maybe they will have different scenarios that kind of play out in the situation, in the relationship, where they can demonstrate, the trafficker can demonstrate how loyal they are to that person. And what ends up happening is they, as a trafficker, they are looking for intel, basically. They're looking for information. They're looking for vulnerabilities. They're looking for things that they can capitalize on and apply leverage to, so that they can coerce someone into the life. Are we good on, I'm getting something saying the internet connection's unstable. Are we good? Andy, are you hearing me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you just fine.
Excellent. Very good. Okay. So this coercive element is really, it's a dynamic that the person doesn't realize. The person that is the potential victim doesn't realize that, what this individual is doing. They have no idea. And so for example, take for example, a single parent mom. That's kind of it's one we see a lot. and that individual, they have those children, they care about them. I want each of you guys to think about, do you have someone in your life that you care about, that if threat of harm was made against that person, that maybe could pull you to do something in order to alleviate the harm coming to that person, that you might be willing to do something you otherwise would not do. And for a mom and her kids, that's a big deal. So anyway, the coercive piece is again that, again, finding those vulnerabilities and then threat of harm to being made against those things that individual cares about. Another example could be substance use disorder. Maybe someone is very much, utilizing substances in their life to cope and deal with things that come their way. And that is a vulnerability, absolutely, right? That trafficker, we call it drug control, and they are looking for individuals that are, using substances and that have a substance use disorder, and they are going to be their supplier for 3-4 weeks. And the person, usually starts off thinking, yeah, this is too good to be true. Like, nobody does that. This might be my best friend or my boyfriend, but, nobody does that. And then after about 3 or 4 weeks, then it's, you owe me, and the tables turn, and things change. And then they withhold the drug, and they've already made the person very dependent on them. And it's just a really bad situation. So you can see the coercion piece, I hope. And then finally, obviously, as I mentioned, for the purpose of commercial sex or labor or service. And then there's one caveat here, one exception to this action means purpose that I'm telling you about. And that has to do with a juvenile, someone who is under the age of 18. And that juvenile as related to commercial sex, okay? And that exception in the law is that there is no force or fraud or coercion needed in order for it to be a crime. You basically just need to commit the action that's listed for the purpose of commercial sex with a juvenile, no force, fraud, or coercion needed in order for it to be a crime. And so I want to be really clear, what we're talking about here has everything to do with the age of the juvenile and their ability to consent to a sexual act in the state of Utah. And so what Utah is basically saying, and the federal government, this is a federal statute as well, is that there is a big exception for a juvenile as it relates to commercial sex in terms of if trafficking is a crime or not. So we have a guy in jail right now, actually he's in prison, for attempting to recruit a juvenile into the life. And he was standing on, so you know how like at a Motel 6, you have sort of an outdoor sort of ledge, right? And then, or patio. And then below on the next floor, you have the same ledge. So he was standing on the upper ledge, and he saw a teenage girl below, and he was actually there running, call it running an op, but it's a different kind of situation, right? Obviously he's the trafficker. So he has 2 women that are seeing clients in hotel rooms, and but he sees this girl down below, and he says to the girl, hey, you have beautiful hair. Do you want to make some money? And that alone, what ended up happening is mom, the mother of the girl, the door to their hotel room was open, and she heard what this guy said. And they were able to demonstrate clearly what his business was. And so that was an attempt to recruit someone into the life. And that alone, again, there was no force, fraud, or coercion there, but that alone got him put in prison. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. What questions can I answer for you about the definition of trafficking?
If you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into chat or in the Q&A screen. And you can also, in the Q&A screen, ask those anonymously. I will never say your name out loud regardless, because this, can be accessed later. But
nice. Okay, I'm going to proceed unless we end up having questions come in. Okay. And please, at any time, like even mid-sentence, you just type in a question, I'm good. Okay, So one of the things that we are well aware of is that folks kind of have an understanding that around, the United States in general, yeah, human trafficking is happening, especially lately. There's been a whole lot going on related to human trafficking and anti-trafficking efforts. We have a lot of partners nationally and throughout the state that are working on that, and that's fabulous. And that's we work in collaboration with those agencies. But when these people were asked about, if trafficking is happening in their local area, like Lehigh, Saratoga Springs, Provo, that number goes down to 20, excuse me, 20%, which means that they think it's happening kind of everywhere else, but not really a lot where they live locally. I can tell you, we have right now 114 clients from the state of Utah where trafficking is occurring. And I can tell you that is just the tip of the iceberg. We have a husband who trafficked his wife in Saratoga Springs. We have a mom who trafficked her daughter in Provo for a couch and a love seat, breaks, back rent. We have all kinds of things going on. We have a woman who, and I usually bring this up later, but I'll just share this, a woman who trafficked 28 females out of her home across the street from Ogden High School. And we're seeing a huge increase in residence-based commercial sex in Utah. Okay, so just kind of give you an idea, I just want to make it clear, it is happening in your neighborhood, very likely. Let me share with you a little bit of information from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So I hope that you'll commit the hotline number to memory. It's 888-3737-888. You can see it there, or you can also text Be Free. I'm kind of I prefer texting just because I'm not a fan of waiting on hold per se, although they don't keep you on too long. But anyway, you can see 11,500 cases reported from the US, right, to the national hotline. They probably got 4 times that in phone calls. They get tips, they get questions, they get all kinds of things at that hotline. It is a valuable resource. And there are also resources on the hotline that are very well vetted. The hotline will not allow someone to be included in their resource list unless they vet them in complete fashion. And I can tell you our agency's on there, and it is not easy to go through that process. 72% of those cases were sex trafficking, 11% labor trafficking, 4% sex and labor trafficking. You can see there for under the sex trafficking, 40% were children. Typically it's around 50% are children, and typically around 80% female. You can see the labor trafficking numbers are lower, and I want to talk about that for a minute. And let me ask you, why do you think the labor trafficking numbers might be lower? Other than, well, you can also state the obvious, which is it's happening less. That's perfectly fine. So can we do like a
type into chat, y'all.
What do you think?
What do you think? Why do you think labor trafficking, those numbers are lower?
Okay, we have I don't think we have a response yet. Oh, we do, there's something. Let's see, chat is 3. I need my glasses. So, okay. It's less recognizable. Good. Okay, Andy, you go.
Okay. Labor trafficking is easier to bust, maybe citizenship status. Laborers are often more isolated on a farm, etc., and may not speak the language or have access to help. Undocumented, so people are afraid to report.
Excellent. Okay, all of those are fabulous. Let's see. The thing I want to share is that all of those are exactly right. In labor trafficking, some of them. Oh, okay. I guess I have a thing going on with my computer. Okay, so definitely labor trafficking, right? We see it happening. in great measure in a more isolated setting, absolutely. We also have people, right? You see the 68% foreign nationals or legalized immigrants, but we also have many that are not, legalized immigrants, and they're in this country, and they are absolutely at the, their traffickers have them in a bind. There's no question about it. And if they come in legally on a work visa, that's another issue. If they come in legally on a work visa, what ends up happening is that they are in this country legally as long as they're in the employ of the person who's become the trafficker. So that's ironic, right? So we are working with the federal legislature to be able to get a law passed that addresses that. The other thing is, on its face, sex trafficking is, we can see it. We can see it. We can see an advertisement. We can see somebody standing on North Temple or Main or State, right? We can see advertisements on the internet. And we know that throughout the United States, generally, always trafficking is illegal. Prostitution isn't. There are a few spots in the United States where it's legal, but really, for the most part, on its face, it is an illegal activity. We see it and we go, yeah, okay, so that person is engaging in commercial sex, right? And so on its face, it's illegal. Labor trafficking, on its face, it is not illegal. So it is much, much more difficult to spot. It could be the person waiting on you at your favorite restaurant. It could be the person who's cooking your meal. It could be the construction worker on a nearby construction site that you work nearby, or is nearby your home. So there are a variety of different dynamics there with labor trafficking, where on its face, it doesn't appear to be an illegal activity. And so it is harder to spot, right? And we'll get into the details of that here in a minute. But I hope that addresses the question. And thank you, everybody, for your participation. Okay. One thing I want to share with you is that during the pandemic, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen nationally a 40% increase in what we would have expected for this year. So you compare the same time period in 2019, factor in sort of the rate of increase we typically see, and we're 40% higher than that in terms of trafficking cases in this year so far. And that's huge. That's from the hotline. And then, of course, the emergency shelter needs have nearly doubled, right? So these are things we would expect, but in fact, the statistics definitely show that as well. I want to show you what's happening here in Utah, kind of the hot spots. We have kind of, you can see where things are redder, they're hotter, right? Which means there's more activity going on. And right up here, this area, the very northmost part of Utah, is kind of North Ogden, although we have had a couple of recent labor trafficking cases in Logan. And then all the way down to probably the southern tip of Utah County. And then you can see there in the middle of the state, Price. That's Carbon County for the most part there. And in Price, we have mining, and we also have the oil industry. And there tend to be, so in Price, let me just state firstly, the majority, well, probably half and half cases are labor trafficking and sex trafficking. I maybe say 2/3 labor trafficking, 1/3 sex trafficking. And what we're seeing is that in Price, those industries are oftentimes connected with use of substances, okay? And I don't want to stereotype one person. My son-in-law is, he works for Barrick Mining in the middle of Nevada, and I know that he absolutely is not using any substances, so I don't want to stereotype for a second, but we do often see that. Law enforcement has shared that with us, the FBI as well, and so we do often see that. And then, and so where you have a lot of drugs, you tend to have a lot of trafficking. And we're going to talk about why that is. here in a minute. And then you can see down below there, Cedar City and St. George. And you notice here, right, it's going on the I-15. It's definitely happening at truck stops, and the I-15, we call it a track, right? It's kind of that corridor where there's a lot of activity there. If things get hot in for a trafficker in Vegas, they'll move up into Utah for a while, maybe up into Wyoming or Idaho, and then, you know, back down into Vegas. So they're moving around a fair amount, although some things are happening in neighborhoods. So it's just a variety of different dynamics there. Okay. Let's see. I want to share with you a little bit about what our program is seeing. Right now, we've served a total of 114 clients in 2020. That is a 50% increase from the same period the year before. And you can see our numbers are a little bit different. Sex trafficking and labor trafficking are more similar. And one of the reasons for that is because we have made a huge concerted effort to reach out to a variety of organizations where there may be labor trafficking spotted. And so, for example, all of the consulates in the state, we are in the process of training each of them to understand what labor trafficking is, and that when citizens of their country come in for assistance, oftentimes what we were hearing from especially the Mexican consulate and the Peruvian consulate is that the traffickers, and they suspected it was the trafficker, was coming in with the person to take care of documentation issues or whatever, and the trafficker was holding the documents. And of course, that is illegal. They are not to be in possession of anyone else's documents. No one should have possession of anyone else's documents. And so anyway, we have had a lot of referrals come to our agency and to law enforcement as a result of that. You'll see also 98% female, right? So we have a higher percentage of females in sex trafficking here in Utah, or we should say individuals who identify as female. But honestly, I have to tell you, I think that we just need to do a better job of getting out to a more diverse population. And so we are reaching out and making efforts to do that. In terms of youth, we work with the VOA and a lot of other youth organizations, and in our state, it's 31%, although again, I think it's more a function of we need to do a better job of really reaching out in meaningful ways. So we are getting after that. And then you can see the labor trafficking numbers, right? Typically it's lower with youth, although what we're seeing a lot in the state of Utah is youth who've been recruited to come via the internet from places like El Salvador and Venezuela and other places that are recruited by I'll just say drug cartels. I could name them, but I won't get into that. By drug cartels that are recruiting them to come in to sell heroin on the streets of Salt Lake City. And so we are seeing, and that's of course labor trafficking, right? They're doing labor, they're forced to do that labor, and they're told, you know, their family's kind of held in the balance, right? If they don't come and do that, then harm will come to their family. Or another potential recruitment piece is you can come into the US and make a bunch of money for your family, send it home, maybe bring them back to the US with you. But of course, none of those things are actually come to fruition. Okay, I want to share with you a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of kind of the top recruitment tactics for sex trafficking. I'm going to show you all 5. These are the top 5. This is national data. This is also Utah data. We always analyze the national data when it comes out. And for the last 2 years, we have data from 19, from 18, and this was at the end of 17. And so we have this data. And familial trafficking has been in the top 5 for both sex and labor recruitment tactics and types of trafficking for the last 3 years. So anyway, I want to make that really clear. Number 1 is always the intimate partner dynamic. You know, she thinks he's the boyfriend. He thinks she's the girlfriend. They think that they're, you know, significant others to each other. However it is that relationship of trust and intimate partner dynamic, right? Number 2 is familial, and that's family trafficking family. So, you know, like I said, the couple examples I gave earlier, a husband trafficking his wife, a mother trafficking her daughter. We have a lot of parents right now that are trafficking their children to finance their drug habit. And you can see the others there. Posing as a benefactor, that's where someone's kind of, you know, I'm just living with this guy who's kind of taking care of me and helping me out while I'm in school and working, right? But of course, the person's not really going to school and they are being trafficked. Job offer and then false promises or fraud. And then you can see the labor trafficking, right? And familial is number 4 in terms of top recruitment tactics. And of course, number 1 would be job offer. That makes sense. False promises or fraud. I'm going to promise you that things are going to be this way, and you come into the U.S. or you come to, you know, to work for me, and they of course are not nearly as they were told they would be. Smuggling related, I want to make a point about smuggling. Smuggling is a crime against a border, right? So say if you're smuggling something or someone from Mexico to the United States, that's a crime against a border. Trafficking is a crime against a person, an individual, and trafficking does not need at all to involve any type of movement. So the husband who was trafficking his wife, she's not allowed to leave the house. She's not allowed to go to the grocery store. He does all the shopping, the whole deal. And anyway, so my point is that trafficking is what I described to you. Smuggling is, again, that it requires movement. It's a crime against a border, but trafficking does not. You can have them co-occur, right? You can be smuggling someone into the country and you can be trafficking them in the process. You can definitely have that co-occurring, but I will just want to make the distinction that they are very different. Okay. So just so we're on the same page, familial trafficking is in the top 5 for both sex and labor in the last 3 years. That's big. Okay, so here are some potential indicators and risk factors, red flags, right? And so you can see there are a variety of things. I'm not going to go through each one. You are welcome. We can't share the PowerPoint, but you're welcome to take occasional pictures of things you want to remember. I'm totally fine with that. And so you can see, right, no identification. So, you know, for example, when the trafficker, you know, say it's typically in this instance, it's a labor trafficking situation. The person comes in, the trafficker says, or an initial employer, right, says, here, let me hold on to your work visa, let me hold on to your documents and keep them safe for you. But of course, you know, then when things get bad and the person who's come in realizes that they are they were sold a bill of goods that isn't reality, right? That things are not the way they were told they would be, then, you know, they start pushing back. And that's when the person says, I've got your documents. And if I want to turn you into ICE and say that you're undocumented, you know, and they threaten all kinds of things, that person, you know, quickly changes their tune. It looks like we have a question. Do we? Let's see, chat.
Can you share the 2019 stats? Could you send any of that yes. information and then I can get it emailed out? I'll write it down.
Actually, I can do that right now. Let me get back to real quick. I'm going to share that. It's all right in here. Oh, let's see. Yeah, 219. Oh, I don't have them in my notes. Okay, yeah, then I will. 2019 stats, I can tell you this number. I'm going to show you this number right here was 8,000. I want to say 200. If that's the stat you're interested in, let me know if that covers what you're interested in. The percentages are about the same. I think in 2019, this is the 2019. So 2020 stats, we don't have yet because we're still in the middle of 2020. And I do have the information on COVID. And so does that make that clear? So this is 2019. We won't have 2020 completed till they actually don't usually get them out till like March or April of the following year because there's so much to do. But this is 2020 data right here. And this is our 2019 to 2020 or to 2020 data for our agency. And then this is the same. So these, if you look up from Polaris Project, their data, it's going to match this. It's been the same for the last 3 years. So I hope that makes sense. If you have additional questions, though, let me know. Okay, so you can see, right, another indicator, living with the employer or living and working in the same place. That happens at nail salons a lot. It happens at massage parlors. It happens obviously in labor trafficking and agriculture. Those folks live and work in the same place, but that's not quite. So that's also can be a red flag, not always in agriculture, but in nail salons and massage parlors, definitely. If someone's unsure of their location or, they seem disoriented, that's another thing. Avoiding eye contact, you can see the various things here. Inconsistencies in their story, or they seem to be coached in what to say. Like you ask them a question and they say that answer, and then you ask them kind of a different question and they say sort of the same answer. And so there's lots of different indicators. They exhibit fear, anxiety, paranoia, right? They're not in control of their money or their documents, which I've mentioned already. If they identify in, as LGBTQ plus, Andy, is that still the right nomenclature, or is there new nomenclature that you should update me on?
For LGBTQIA folks?
Oh, IA. Okay.
Yeah.
So I need to make a note.
And
Sorry?
it can be regional too. So it depends on where you're at. Different places, different regions also use different language. Some folks say the queer community. Some folks, I know I use for my trainings Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+, so I can write it in chat.
I love the Two-Spirit. Yeah, and I've heard that. And I usually use that when I'm doing a one for the tribes. But yeah, okay. Would you send me a little doo-doo-doo? And I'm going to incorporate that into my presentation.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Andy, okay, perfect. So yeah, and then also anyone who's runaway or homeless, right? They have a very much an indicator or a vulnerability for being trafficked, and that could be an indicator that they are engaging in sex trafficking. Foster care and the juvenile justice system. So what we know is that 2/3 of our trafficking victims have experienced some enrollment in either foster care or juvenile justice. That's huge, 2/3. And so that, that's huge. If there's any evidence of sexual trauma, multiple STIs, right? Unusual tattoos or brands on the body. We're seeing a lot of branding in places that you don't typically, like a lot of times it used to be on the neck or the wrist or, the arm or, even the chest area. But now they're in places that you wouldn't see if the person is dressed, even if they're dressed in, maybe more revealing clothing. And so maybe a medical professional would have opportunity to see that. The other thing we're seeing is UV light sensitive tattooing or branding. And so that's another thing that we're seeing a lot. Let's see. A lot of times they might say, well, yeah, this is my brother, this is my dad, this is my uncle. And of course, it's not. Multiple pregnancies or abortions, and then some drug use going on. So these are some potential indicators. There's general and then these for the sex trafficking. I want to share with you a little bit about what we see in terms of, and you guys probably see a lot of these folks, right, that have experienced complex trauma. What we know is that trafficking, to kind of make the connection here, if you are engaged in a situation where you are being trafficked, you are experiencing trauma on a daily basis. And so there's a whole lot of lasting impact on that individual as a result of that complex trauma, okay? And so these are some things we typically see in folks that have experienced complex trauma. Obviously, that would be a big indicator that, there is a potential trafficking situation that has occurred in that person's life. Not only that, right, we know a variety of different things can lead to complex trauma, but this would be a potential red flag. And for the sake of things, I wanted to go over some detail on this, right? So difficulty regulating their affective impulses. What is affective impulses? That's where we're talking about their ability to regulate their emotions, right? Their affect. And so things like anger or self-destructiveness, right? Dissociative episodes, that's where someone is disconnected from their body. Their mind, their brain is disconnected from their body, and it's very clear. I don't know, I'm sure many of you have seen a dissociative episode. I witnessed several in Vegas and some up here, and you kind of know it when you see it, right? A chronic sense of guilt or responsibility. In other words, things are being discussed maybe, and then something doesn't go quite right that really isn't related to anything that person had control over, but they're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I apologize, and it's not even really related to them, right? Difficulty trusting people or feeling intimate. And the intimate piece is emotionally intimate, right? Sharing things that are very personal, those kinds of things. Hopelessness or despair, and then other mental health or medical problems. So I just kind of want to ferret out that trauma piece a little bit. You guys, I'm sure, are very well versed in this, but these are things that then could be, a potential indicator that this person has experienced the kind of trauma we're talking about in a trafficking situation, and maybe good to have conversations around that a little bit. Okay, so here are some things these are not questions to ask. I want to be super duper clear on that. These are things to have conversations around, or to be thinking to yourself, kind of answering these questions in your mind, right? We've talked about indicators and so forth. And so I want you to kind of just be thinking about these and asking these questions of yourself in your own mind, as to, if you're thinking, man, this might be something there's a trafficking situation going on, answer some of these questions as you go through. Okay. And then we're going to just quickly run through these. It's similar to the previous slide that I mentioned, where we talked about potential red flags. This is more in line with, an actual vulnerability that makes someone vulnerable. Some of those kind of overlap here. Number one is always poverty. Poverty is number one internationally, nationally, and in the state of Utah. If someone is living in squalor, they want to believe the story that is painted, or the beautiful picture that's painted for them about what life can be like if they will just do these things. And so poverty, or if you're trying to feed your children, or just a number of different things related to poverty. Homelessness and runaway, we talked about that. We know that in Salt Lake City, we work with the VOA a lot, and they have a homeless youth outreach team. And the last time I was there, I'm getting ready to do another training, and I always kind of get updates from them when I'm there doing the trainings. But the last time I was there, this was probably almost a year ago, they said within about 24 hours of a juvenile hitting the streets of Salt Lake City, either as a homeless person or as a runaway, they are propositioned for the first time about some form of trafficking. And so, to be very clear, when someone comes onto the streets, initially, they may have some resources, right? They may have some places they could stay, lay their head at night. They may have, a bit of money, a bit of cash, a bit on their debit card, whatever. But after a week or two, or a few weeks, those resources dwindle, and then those propositions may look more and more appealing all the time. Substance use, we talked about that, right? The drug control, traffickers are literally looking for people who they can control with drugs. And so they are looking for that vulnerability. Anyone with a history of sexual abuse or assault, that's a big one. The majority of our trafficking victims have a history of sexual abuse or assault. Child abuse or neglect, or a drug endangered child where parents are using drugs in the home, or selling drugs, or transporting drugs, or a variety of different things are going on. The drugs are the priority in the family. 90% of our trafficking victims have experienced some type of child abuse or neglect. 90%. Okay, so that's huge. age, right? We're talking about juveniles or individuals who don't yet have their frontal lobe fully engaged and developed. I kind of make a joke about this a lot of times and wonder if my frontal lobe is fully engaged at times, but honestly, it really, for the most part, is related to age, or it's also related to someone who might be a vulnerable adult, who is an adult who has some type of cognitive impairment. And we have, in fact, the lady I was telling you about in Ogden that was trafficking 28 women out of her home. One of the people she was trafficking had some cognitive difficulties. And this lady was actually trying to get this person to sign over their SSI checks to her as well. Okay, so then juvenile justice or foster care, I mentioned that already, mental health issues, and then the LGBTQ plus community, and then domestic violence. And so I mentioned those other two, the mental health and LGBTQ plus, but domestic violence I want to mention, that is big in the context of not only someone who's experienced domestic violence, and you think about what is human trafficking. Human trafficking is sexual assault, domestic violence, and a whole bunch of other trauma and crap thrown into the pot, right? So it's very complicated. Domestic violence, someone who's experienced domestic violence, we definitely know based on research the impact it has on them and how that trauma affects them. What we are finding now based on research is the impact it's having on children that have witnessed domestic violence. It is massive, and we cannot discount that. So many people I hear say, yeah, well, we were fighting, but the kids were sleeping. Who is sleeping when their parents are fighting? Like I don't know anybody that is, right? So that's just, not accurate. And then anyone who is a displaced in our community, right? Who's set aside, who's looked at differently, who's marginalized. And so, yeah, those are all vulnerabilities. This just kind of underscores the data that I shared with you. I want to share with you this video. This is Sasha Ray. She's a juvenile, and she's going to share a little bit about the dynamic between she and the trafficker, and a little bit about kind of the thought process for her as she was trafficked in the process of being trafficked. Whoa, okay, that is not cool. Let's see what's going on there.
There's no one profile. It's whatever that buyer wants, that pimp, that trafficker will go out and get. Generally, you want to say that it's a young girl or a young woman on the streets in high heels, skimpy clothes. She could be wearing dungarees or blue jeans and a t-shirt with a backpack on her, because that's the fantasy of that man who wants to buy her that day. So she looked like a typical schoolgirl.
Williams says most of the girls in her program come from troubled homes where they felt ignored. A vulnerability traffickers are quick to exploit.
This is their job. They will sit down and let your daughter or son talk to them for 3 to 4 hours straight without interrupting them. I don't know a mother today or a father today or a grandma that has 3 hours just to sit there and not say a word and let their children talk to them just like they want to. That trafficker, that pimp,
All day.
all day. They're going to learn every piece of information about your child because that's how they keep them.
It was more of a conversation. But I tell him how me and my sister get in an argument, he'd be like, you can't be getting an argument with your sister like that. And he was more like a dad, but then again, we had sex, so it wasn't. So it was just the communication and how he talked to me.
After gaining her trust, the trafficker began asking her for favors.
He slowly put it on me like, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to make this money for me because I really need it. So I did. And then he was like, I love you for that. I love you so much. Da, da, da. And then he would slowly put 2, 3 more guys. And I got upset when I first realized what he was doing. But I kept doing it because he made me feel like I was special.
Night after night, dozens of men, one right after the other.
Mostly on the weekends we go to hotels and they'll have sex with me, drugged up and slobbing on me. One day but I was like, I can't do this no more. I was in pain. I felt like my insides hurted. I felt like in this area it hurted really bad because one day I had sex with almost 40 guys in one day. And I was so tired. And I said, I can't do this no more.
But her trafficker made sure she knew leaving was not an option.
He was like, you ain't going nowhere. And I was like, you want to bet? And then he went to the other room, came back with a gun. And he was like, if you go somewhere, we'll see. He said, I bet you'll be back tomorrow. I bet.
Sasha Ray says she found leaving more difficult than she planned. It wasn't just the threats he made. It was the psychological tactics he employed. When he wasn't threatening her, he acted like he loved her.
It was just like that feeling of him like caring about me, but I knew he didn't. But I still went back.
So, I hope that gives you a really good idea of the dynamic between the trafficker and the victim, right? You heard her talk about, he was like a dad, but then we had sex. So you can imagine how confusing that is, especially for a juvenile. But at the same time, it's also a dynamic of there's a whole lot of power and control in that relationship. Traffickers use isolation, repeated beatings, coercion, all kinds of abuse, psychological abuse. I wouldn't beat you if you wouldn't be so, this or that, right? And so anyway, there's a whole lot of abuse that goes on in the dynamic between the trafficker and the victim. And someone I'm very close to, actually, my husband, who prosecuted these cases for forever and still is, he's really just done it for a long time. He coined this phrase invisible rope. And the dynamic here is that, a lot of people say, well, I saw someone in a 7-Eleven, I kind of thought, or a Maverick, I kind of thought, maybe there's something going on here. And maybe thinking about, potential issue related to trafficking. But then they say, well, but they're out walking around at the store. Well, I can tell you that there is a whole lot of power and control at play in the dynamic, and they can be walking around. But I'll just share with you, I think we have time, I'll share with you one story. It was on a case that my husband prosecuted in Las Vegas when we were there. And anyway, this woman, I won't go into a lot of detail just for time, but basically the coercive piece was her 2 children. He had her 2 children. They were at his house. They initially started in a romantic relationship. She had no idea he was running like 6 other women. And anyway, and then he had a beautiful home in Summerlin in Las Vegas. And so here, you guys can, it was after a few months, you guys can live with me here and it'll be great and whatever. Long story short, she ends up getting pulled into the life through that coercion piece. And so anyhow, then he ended up getting her a hotel room, a motel room actually, in downtown Vegas, where she would do a lot of her work. And he said he'd keep the kids safe at his house. Anyway, and so one day, right after he first got her the motel room, he said, I do not want you to leave here unless you text me or reach me by phone. And I'll tell you, you can go wherever you want to go. And so she gets in about 6 a.m., goes to sleep, sleeps for a few hours, wakes up and is hungry. And there's a 7-Eleven nearby. So she is wanting to go do that. So she texts him. She ends up calling him over 20 times and he doesn't pick up. He never picks up over the course of about an hour and a half. So finally she's like, okay, well, you know, I'm just going to run to the 7-Eleven. I'm going to grab a quick snack and come back. And so as soon as her foot crossed the threshold of that motel room door, she hears her name being screamed from the parking lot. And of course, it's her trafficker, who of course she initially thought was a boyfriend several months prior. And so anyway, he tells her to get inside, take off all of her clothes, and he beats her severely. And he tells her to take off the clothes because they have value, right? He doesn't want to have to buy new clothes, and he beats her severely. Bottom line is, right, you can see that was a test, right? He was conditioning her to have a certain response when he tells her, you know, something needs to be a certain way, and then she goes against that, which is called being out of pocket. Then there are those consequences that come her way. And she told my husband, he was prosecuting her case, and she told him this was 3 years later, by the time she finally got out of the life and the case was up for prosecution. She told him, she said, I know it sounds crazy, but there were so many times just like that where I would start to go do something against, basically to leave that motel room when I couldn't reach him, knowing that him running 7 women, there's no way he could be in every single place at once. And that it was very unlikely for him to have been there at that point. But she said, I could not bring myself to exit that motel room. So that's an example, right, of the dynamic and the power and control that's at play in the trafficking situation. Okay, where's recruitment happening? I'm not going to go through this in detail. You can see we work regularly with the FBI and with the gang task force here. And what we're seeing, and I want to just make this point for the internet and for video game chat, they're seeing a huge number of recruitment or a huge amount of recruitment happening via the video game chat feature. So the FBI has cautioned us when I do the presentations to tell you that if you know any children or college age students that are playing video games and they're using the chat feature, to turn off that chat feature. That's a big one. We're also seeing, high school seniors or junior females that are in the semi-popular to popular crowd recruiting from the freshman to sophomore crowd that maybe isn't such a popular, that person isn't in the popular crowd, they're maybe in the not so popular crowd. This is data from Shared Hope International. They did some research at the end of 2019, and I always like to kind of stay as current as possible. So I'm going to run through this really quickly. They, as you know, there are new apps coming out all the time, and these are the 5, well, they're 4 social media apps and 1 other app. These are the apps that were most likely to have illicit content, recruitment happening, things like that on these particular apps. And I think it was like 39 different apps that they did the research on. And what they did was they had investigators. They were male investigators that typically pose online as 15-year-old females. And then lots of things happened. And this was the highest content of illicit content and recruitment happening online. So Yubo is a teen Tinder. And so for parents or grandparents or anyone, Yubo, that is a very sketchy, these are all very sketchy, but Yubo is a teen Tinder. Whisper is a place where you can share your secrets anonymously, but it's very easy to figure out. You use hashtags, and you can figure out kind of who the person is or what their issues are, and then you can recruit from there. TikTok is a hot one right now, right? There's a lot going on with TikTok, not only right for the security dynamics of TikTok, but also tons of illicit content on TikTok. You guys know all about it, I'm sure, what TikTok is, but That is one of the top 4 out of that 39. So I would caution you on that. And then the Omegle, the chat live dynamic, that's a random video chat app. And it basically pairs randomly using their algorithm. It randomly pairs you up to speak face-to-face on video with somebody you do not know based on the profile sharing. And there's been a lot of recruitment and eliciting pictures and pictures coming into inboxes and all kinds of illicit video being shown there. And then the secret calculator, you can see what that looks like, right? The equal sign is kind of turned on its side a bit. That is actually a photo album. It actually looks like a calculator, functions like a calculator, but when you put the percentage sign and the code they gave you at the time you downloaded the app, it lets you into what they call a vault. And it stores photos and videos that you obviously don't want other people to see. And a lot of folks are really concerned about that, and law enforcement is becoming aware of that as well. Okay, where does trafficking happen? You can see, and this is Utah, right? This is information for Utah. You can see all the places where it happens and is happening in Utah. Labor trafficking is happening in homes. It's happening on construction site. It's happening in agriculture. The most common for labor trafficking are restaurants and hotels or motels. Restaurants, it could be your server, it could be the cook. Hotels and motels, it could be and typically is the subcontractor that the hotel has hired to clean the rooms that is doing the trafficking, rather than like the Motel 6 or, the Grand America Hotel last year in, I think, the fall of 2019, got in some hot water. And it was because of the subcontractor they hired to clean their rooms was trafficking their individuals. And so anyway, and so Grand America is also liable for that because they should have vetted the subcontractor better. And then finally, on sex trafficking, you can see where it's happening in great measure. And then the residence-based commercial sex, I would say, is the one that's quickly on the rise. Okay, I want to share with you a little bit about the trauma bond. You might wonder, why do people stay in this situation that is so harmful to them? And so I want to, obviously we have the force, fraud, or coercion that initially pulls them in, and that sometimes keeps them in. Oftentimes it does. But then we have an additional piece, which is called the trauma bond. You probably have heard of Stockholm Syndrome, but the trauma bond is the brain's response to trauma. Okay, trauma bond is a neurobiological coping mechanism. The goal of the brain is survival, right? And so in order for the person to survive the trauma they experience at the hands of the trafficker, often the brain attempts to increase the person's perception of safety while decreasing their perception of pain. And that then allows a groundwork for this trauma bond to form. The person needs to believe that there's a real or perceived threat, right? That they are under threat. And of course, the force, fraud, or coercion will do that. Okay, perceived small acts of kindness from the abuser. That could be, I just beat the crap out of you, and 2 hours later, I'm going to give you back your underclothing because you seem uncomfortable, right? Isolation is a huge tool. We talked about that when we looked at the power and control wheel. It's a huge tool of a trafficker. No social support, no social media, no contact with family, no contact with friends. It's just the trafficker and the trafficker's friends, right? Perceived inability to escape the situation. So those are the things that are typically need to be present in order for the trauma bond to form. Then once the trauma bond is formed, this is how the victim will typically behave. Positive feelings toward the abuser. Okay, so what does that mean? That means they think they love them, they care for them, they have positive feelings toward the trafficker, right? Negative feelings toward those wanting to help to provide assistance to them. And so that's like, you know, somebody who says, hey, you know, have you thought about maybe doing something different with your life? You know, is this a really healthy situation to be in? They do not want to discuss that. It is a threat to that current situation. And so they, you know, and this is an attachment. This is an attachment they have. I'll be very clear. It's a one-way attachment, right, between the victim and the trafficker. And then they come to the aid of the abuser. If they get pulled in on, say, a theft, because the trafficker said, you know, don't come back from your date empty-handed. Well, that doesn't mean the money that they're owed because of the date, right? Because of the commercial sex. That means you need to steal a credit card, a wallet, a ring, something else from the buyer in addition to the cash. And a lot of times then they're pulled in on a theft, right? And then the law enforcement is talking with them and attempting to understand what's going on. And maybe they suspect there's a trafficking situation. They begin to chat about it, but they will lie and say, and a lot of times they think he's the boyfriend anyway, but they'll lie and say, oh yeah, no, he's my boyfriend. No, I'm not engaging in, you know, commercial sex, whatever. No, he's good to me. They may have a series of different injuries on them and so forth, but no, he doesn't hurt me, none of that. And they're unwilling and unable to engage in behaviors that would provide for their release or freedom. And really it's just a lot about change, and that change is scary. And maybe if they were in a really bad situation in their home life or prior to meeting this person, you know, how do they not know that they could get in a situation that's even worse, right? So there's just a lot going on in their minds, and especially when you experience trauma, there's a whole lot going on. But bottom line is that trauma bond is that neurobiological coping mechanism that the brain employs in order to allow the person to survive the situation. Okay, I'm going to skip that. I want to focus on kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift I hope we can make. And probably you guys are way ahead of me, but I want to ask you to think about in your own life, in your professional life, in your home life, in your neighborhood, do you ever see behavior that looks like this, right? You know, you might, oh, good. We have a question. Can you go back to the slide with the cycle? Yes, I can. Okay. I love it. Okay. We are going back to the cycle slide. Right there. We aim to please from current slide. Okay. Oh, well, let me go back because it's not there. So yeah, I can discuss this briefly, right? So we know the cycle of change. This is something that, you know, we're very familiar with, but this is important to have in mind because, right, as case managers, as social workers, as people who are going to be working with individuals in this situation, you know, we know in domestic violence, right, someone attempts to leave or leaves and goes back on average 7 times. I thought, if that's still accurate, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong. And so, you know, and that is a domestic violence situation. What we're talking about with trafficking is domestic violence, sexual assault, and a whole bunch of other stuff thrown in there. And so it is really, really hard to contemplate, to actually go through and follow through on that change. And what we see is this kind of cycle of change. You guys know this stuff, I'm sure, but the dynamic, right, is you're in the situation, you realize, you know, you get beat several times, you're addicted maybe to a substance, you're in a situation that's not good for you, you know that, and yet and so you're stuck, right? You're thinking, but I'm here. And then maybe a really bad beating happens. And then you begin to contemplate, okay, you know, maybe I could do something else. Maybe I could get out of this. How could I get out of it? And you begin to contemplate that. Bottom line is you go through this dynamic and, okay, we have one more question. I can include this.
It's just
follow
me.
email. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And let's do that. I'll just quickly run through the rest of it. But anyway, so right, we have the preparation phase, the action phase, and then you actually take the, you know, make the change, you try to leave, you know, do different things, you work through the cycle. But here's the thing, you tend to repeat, right? You tend to go back to what it was. You might go back to a drug, you might go back to the person, right? and especially in a situation with trafficking. But the focus here is on the middle, the upward spiral, right? The point is, and I hope you can see me, right? The point is we are starting down here and we are going up. We might cycle through these phases, but the cycle might be shorter. We will learn things along the way. We gain more confidence along the way as we continue to cycle through these different phases. And the point is, eventually, after each relapse, we're learning that we can maybe do it better next time. How would we change it? How would we do that? Maybe we go through a week and we're like, I'm never doing that again. I got the crap beat out of me. But then, we kind of evolve and continue to grow. And eventually, right, there's progress and the person can finally see their way past it. Okay, I hope that takes care of it in a nutshell. And then let me run through this. Okay, so we see some behavior like this. We could call this defensive. We could call this aggressive. What else could we call this type of behavior? What else could we call this? I'm asking. So maybe Q&A or chat or wherever. What else do we could we call this behavior? Violent, right? So defensive, violent, aggressive, a variety of things, right? We could probably think of, 10 or 20 different descriptors. One thing I want to point out, and this has to do with your response to individuals who behave this way, right? We did a trauma training once, and this woman came up to me afterward and she said, I think I finally get it. She said, I work at a local detention center, and what I do is with my coworkers, we look around at all these youth all day and we just think, man, like, what is wrong with that guy? This girl, they're seeing people be super aggressive and, they're in detention. So like, what's going to come of it, right? Or they have consequences given to them as a result of the behavior. Maybe they start a fight, things like that. And she said, I think I finally get it now, though. Rather than saying, what's wrong with that person, I should be saying, I get it because there's a reason that they behave that way. And so this, I'm going to pass that now because I'm not a fan of hurting animals. But honestly, that I think drives it home, right? We should change our thinking, and we want to change our thinking because it's empowering to us and it's empowering to others. If we can change our thinking from what's wrong with that person when they behave the way that coyote did in the picture initially, you just see the face. And we should be saying what's happened in the life of that person that's caused them to behave this way, right? So that's where we take trauma into account. We take their history into account. And that's so important. So, hopefully there's a paradigm shift there. Let's be thinking instead of when we see that behavior, it helps us also not take the behavior personally, right? There's stuff that's going on behind the scenes there, and that's important. I want to just cover some trauma-informed, victim-centered main points. First of all, when you're working with law enforcement, that was one comment I noticed. Super important to do all you can to educate them. And if you have any contacts there, I am doing my best to get out to as many law enforcement and train them as possible. And I bring law enforcement with me that are trained in trafficking. But I would say one of the most important things you could do is educate them on how trauma impacts a victim. Because what we know is if a victim sits down and tells their story to law enforcement during an interview, they are going to have a fragmented, kind of disjointed dynamic. And that is because that's what trauma does to the brain. There is fragmented memory when they attempt to tell their story. And what does most law enforcement think if they can't tell it all from beginning to end? They think they're lying. And when I present to law enforcement and we talk about this, I say, what do you guys think when someone can't tell the story from beginning to end? And they all say, they're lying, right? So really important to educate them. And in terms of law enforcement, we can go into greater detail if I have time. I have some other thoughts on that. Okay, so let's see. What else do I want to say about this? Meeting people where they are, super important. And we're going to get into that here in a minute. That's that's the trauma-informed victim-centered methodology. Okay, so we know we need to meet basic needs. We know that we need to meet them where they are no matter what. So if someone doesn't feel comfortable taking the bus, maybe we get on the bus with them for a few hours, we sit next to them. A lot of people that have been trafficked, they are linked to that trafficker, and that's been their security blanket. And so they're not comfortable, just going and riding on a bus, for example. And so one example is we had a case of one of our case managers that literally got on the bus with that individual, and throughout the course of about a 3 to 4 hour period, they sat on the bus starting right next to each other, and then the survivor was able to say, okay, now move to the seat in front of me, and things like that. And then she'd have that case manager move farther and farther away until finally she was comfortable sitting on the bus quite a distance from the case manager. And that was just an example of meeting people where they are. Another example is using their language. They call him the boyfriend, he's the boyfriend, and that's the language we use. Being authentic and respectful. I can tell you, individuals who've been trafficked have radar like none other. They know if you're judging, they know if you are, just if you're not telling the truth, they know it. And another piece is, keeping in mind the trauma piece. We don't want to take reactions personally. You will get behavior like that coyote. You'll get cussed out. You'll get, different things that happen. But that is because of the things that have happened to them. And what they're going through is very scary. Okay, providing accurate information, that's not lying. Avoid repeated interviews. Obviously, that's re-traumatizing. We want to support their coping strategies. We also want to come up with coping strategies together, right? The process of this is to empower the person out of the life, not to whisk them up, take them away, and take all the power, right? They've had no power, so we want to empower them out of the life. Let's see, some possible talking points. Again, these are not questions you would ask per se. I want to just make that really clear. These are things you'll have conversations around. These are talking points, right? And so you're welcome to flash a picture of that. Sometimes you kind of get stuck and you think, how am I going to broach this subject with this person? And then finally, I just want to share with you information, right? We're all mandatory reporters. If there's any situation where a juvenile you think is being trafficked, that is really an important piece. And that's a required, mandated by law report to law enforcement or to DCFS. I would say make the report to both. You see the hotline number there. And then this is the Utah Attorney General's Office tip line. They have an excellent tip line with investigators that are trained and prosecutors that are trained in terms of how to investigate and prosecute human trafficking. You have the Internet Crimes Against Children tip line that we add here, and they are excellent, also a part of the AG's office, but they have their own tip line. And then the Trafficking in Persons Task Force we're a part of, you're welcome to reach out to them. And then our agency and our information, and I'll give you my information just right there. What questions can I answer for you? We have about 3 minutes. And I would be delighted to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison. That was wonderful, as usual. Does anyone have any questions, or would anyone like to see a certain slide again, or have a certain topic readdressed? So someone says, would you go back to possible talking points about 3 slides ago?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, let's get back right there. And then also, you guys don't hesitate to reach out to me directly if you have a question, or I get calls all the time from different places, and mostly emails now because I'm not in my office per se, right? So I would say email is the way to get in touch with me. But yeah, don't hesitate to reach out and ask me, anything that's coming up that you have questions about.
All right, does anyone else have any questions? Will you, Allison, will you move your chat box over to the right a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so
Yeah.
sorry. I just
It shows
realized
as
I'm
a
sharing my
gray
screen.
box for us for some reason.
Okay. It looks like there's one more. I don't know.
Someone said thank you for the
Oh,
presentation.
oh,
Yeah,
good. Yeah. It's a
very
pleasure, guys.
informative.
Thank you so much. And don't hesitate to reach out to me. Really, I'm delighted to help in any way. And if you're just not sure if what you're seeing looks like what it is, we also have so many resources. And of course, direct case management and holistic resources and wraparound services for individuals who've been trafficked here. And here I just mean in the world. Actually, we can assist anyone now. It used to be that we could only assist if the trafficking occurred on the person's way into the United States or in the US, but we can now do assist those who've been internationally trafficked as well. Any other
All right.
comments?
Well, I think we can close a couple minutes early here.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you go back to your contact information so folks can jot
Yes,
it down really quick if they
gladly.
need to?
And
There you
again,
go.
just the email probably rather than the phone call.
Yeah. And would you mind typing that into chat and then folks could?
Yeah, my email?
Yeah.
Yeah, right now. Oh, but the thing is there. Let me move that over. So
Yeah, and if you have any questions, comments, you can always reach out to me, of course, at the coalition, or you can reach Allison directly. But yeah, there you go.
thanks,
There's the email
guys.
address in the chat. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending. We will see you again, I believe, next week for another rockin' webinar. Yeah, I thank all of you for attending and all the great questions that you have. Yeah, stay safe. Remember, we're still in a pandemic. Wear those masks and social distance. Thanks, everyone. Have an excellent
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.